Alright, so the next tutorial that we're going to do is it's going to use particles. And so we're going to start to look at some different aspects of particles and different particle types and that sort of thing, expression writing. And what we're going to create is kind of sort of a Big Bang style explosion that's going to throw out satellites and planets. And then we're going to use some fields to try to get those satellites to start swirling around the planets. So just a simple little simulation that just sort of starts to introduce the particles to us. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and figure out what we're going to do in terms of parameters of this animation. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new project. So File. Ooh, come on now. File. There we go. Project window. And this is going to be a new project. We'll call it Big Bang or Solar System, something like that. We'll call it Big Bang. And then I am just going to save this on my desktop. You can save this on your flash drive or wherever you feel like you're going to be saving stuff. So, and we'll call it, yeah, we've already, actually, let me go ahead and go back to the desktop there and hit select. And then we'll have all of these as our folders and say accept. And then just to double check, I'll come out to the desktop and you can see right here we have a project called Big Bang. And you guys all know this. This is not news to you, but it's always a good reminder to just make sure that you're creating a project for everything. So then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set the frame rate. And I'm actually going to change this from the default, just, you know, because we haven't really done that a lot. And it's good to just see all the different options of things that you can do. So I'm going to come down here to settings. And the default is for film, and that's 24 frames per second. But we are going to say that this project is going to be for video or TV or whatever. So we're going to change this actually to NTSC 30 frames per second. So that's going to be what this project is going to use. So we'll change that there, say save. And then we're going to also make sure that we set the time slider to play every frame. Because especially when you're doing dynamics, you need it to not play in real time because it's going to skip frames sometimes, and then your simulations will not calculate correctly sometimes. So there's a few different ways that you can do that. You can just right-click in the timeline, go up to playback speed, and make sure it's set to play every frame. Or you can come up here to the preferences, and you can come down here where it says time slider, and you can change it right here. So either one of those will be fine. It's set to there already for me, so that's good. So then the next thing that we need to do is just start to put some stuff in the scene. So we'll create a particle emitter first. I'm going to come up here and change this menu to dynamics. And we're going to go particles, create emitter, and go to the option box. And then I'm just going to reset the settings here. It's usually a good idea to do that if you've been working along with different particle things, and because you might have created an emitter for something else and messed with these settings, and that's not what you need for this scene. So it's always a good idea anytime you go in the option box to go ahead and reset your settings. And then we're just going to create it. So now what we have, if we play our timeline, it's just spraying out some things. And this is a really short timeline right here, so I'm going to change this to about 200 frames. And then double click this so we can see the whole thing. Then when you play it, you can see we've got some stuff spraying out. That's our particles. So we've got the particle emitter in the middle, and then the particles are spraying out from it. Now what you can see if we come over to the emitter attribute editor is that the emitter type is called Omni. There's a few different other options that you can do that do different things, and we can talk about that at some point. And a few other things that you can set up here, and we'll talk about some of that too. So, but for now, we've got our emitter. So now we can start setting up some things. What we want to do is change the start frame because we want to sort of delay our explosion. We want to be able to sort of have space sitting here, and then we have our explosion coming out, and it's not starting right at the very beginning here. So what you can do is go to selecting the particles. So let me just play this a little more so that I can get the particles. There we go. So we've got the actual particle selected and not the emitter. And then come over to the attribute editor and let's see where the start frame is. You know what? It might be easier to find in the channel box. You have tons of stuff in the channel box too. We're looking for the start frame right here. So it says 1, which means it's going to start from frame 1. But we want to change that. We want to make sure that it's going to start on frame 30 instead of 1. So I'm going to change that to frame 30. And now when we play our timeline, it doesn't explode until frame 30. So that's a way that you can sort of figure out exactly which time you want your particle simulation to happen. And then the other thing that we're going to do is let's go ahead and select this emitter. And we're going to just give a little more randomness to our explosion and a little more chaos. So I'm going to go in the attribute editor here with our emitter selected. And I'm going to go and find where it says speed random. Speed random right here. It's going to be under basic emission speed attributes in the attribute editor under the emitter tab. And I'm going to change this to 1. And then we'll see what this looks like. And you can see it's a little bit more, you know, we've got some things shooting out a little farther. What happens with the speed random is that you have a speed set, and then if you randomize it, then that's sort of anywhere between sort of 1, which is this speed, and 0, which means nothing at all, and all the speeds in between, there's going to be particles coming out at all different speeds. So it's just going to randomize how fast the particles come out based on how much speed you have set. So if you change this to 2, then you might have a little bit different result. Yeah, see, we've got stuff coming out a lot farther, faster. If you wanted to, you know, maybe change this to 1, but change this to something really high, like 10, let's see what would happen if we did that. So we're still getting a lot of randomization right there. So just play with these and figure out, you know, what you like. But we're going to stick here with this, just 1 and 1 on both of these. So then the next thing that you want to do is you want to increase the number of particles. So because you want to have a little more than what we have here. Right now we just have 100 particles coming out per second. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to set some keyframes on this so that it's not solidly coming out the whole time either. So that'll be more like an explosion as well. So what we'll do is we'll select our emitter, which it's already not selected. Go over here in the channel box and find rate. You can do this in the attribute editor too if that's easier to see for you, but you're going to find the rate. Change this rate from 100 to 50,000. So 50000. And then when you play this, one thing that you can see is this timeline is slowing way down. That's going to happen with particles a lot. The more stuff you have going on, the slower it's going to play. But you can also see how many particles. It's just solid with particles right here. So you definitely wouldn't probably want that for your whole simulation. So let's set some keyframes. So let's go ahead and go to frame 30. So I'll just go to frame 30 right here. Let's see, and then we will set the keyframes, set the rate right here, set a keyframe for the rate. Actually, you know what, let me get back to the emitter here. And we'll just right click on here and go to set key. That way that's keyframed. And then we're going to jump forward to frame 32, and then we'll set this to 0. So what's going to happen is there's not going to be any particles until frame 30 because that's when our start time is. Then it's going to blow out as much as it can towards 50,000 particles per second on frame 30. And then at frame 32, it's going to shut completely down again. So let's see how that looks. And that's our explosion right there. That's going to be a lot more like what we're going to want. So in terms of the number of particles and how it's moving away from the center as well. So now the next thing that we need to do is make sure that we got our stuff named correctly. So I'm just going to come up here to the outliner. Our emitter is going to be called satellite emitter, because these particles right here that we're working with right now, these are going to be our satellites for our little mock Big Bang that we're creating. So I'm just going to come over here and double click, and this is going to be called satellite emitter. And then the particles are going to be our satellites. So, whoops. So that's done for us. So now the next thing that we need to do is put our planets in. So we've got our satellite set up. So now we need to do some planets. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to one here. And I'm going to select this emitter. And what you can do, it's a little tricky if you're going to duplicate emitters, especially if you've already started working with them. For a long time, what I would always do is just export them and then import them in. But you can do it a different way if you want. And that is, you can select it, and then instead of just hitting Control-D to duplicate, you'll come up to Edit, go down here to Duplicate Special, and go in the option box. You're going to reset this just to make sure. And then what you'll do is you'll check this where it says Duplicate Input Graph. And that's going to bring in anything that you've changed over here. So if you've written expressions or applied shaders or set any keyframes. Because otherwise, if you just duplicate an emitter and you don't do this, it's just a fresh new emitter. It's like at the defaults again. You have to set up everything again. But if you come in here to Duplicate Special and you check this on, then what you'll have is you'll have the same thing that you just did. So we'll do that now. And then, so now we have some new particles and a new emitter, and we're going to change the names of those. So the emitter is going to be our planet emitter. And then the second set of particles are going to be the planets. So now we've got that all set up. And then this second set of particles, we're going to change the type as well, because we have points for this one, the satellites. For the planets, we're actually going to need something else. So I'm going to go over here to our Planet Shape tab, come down where it says Render Attributes, and where it says Particle Type, I'm going to change it to Spheres. And now we have a bunch of little balls there as well. So now when we play it, you can see we can't even really see our satellites anymore because we have so many planets. So that's the next thing that we're going to start messing with, is trying to get the planets sort of tamed down and not as many, and spread them out a little bit. So I've got the planets selected. I'm going to come over here to the attribute editor, and where it says, we're going to be under the Planet Shape tab. So we're going to go down where it says Random Stream Seeds, right here, Emission Random Stream Seeds. Open that. And we're going to change this to 34. And what's going to do there is it's going to spread out the planets, because it's going to randomize where they fly. So instead of just coming out straight, that's what's going to happen there. So what's going to happen when we play this, if I hit enter, then you can't really see anything yet because there's so many of them. But what we'll probably do is set some keyframes on our planets here in a couple minutes. But let me go ahead and pause for just a second, and then we'll be right back. Alright, so when we left off, we were starting to talk about how we were going to animate these spheres so that they were going to come out in the right amount at the right time. So there's a few different ways that you can handle this. You can go ahead and just set keyframes like we did before, but we sort of already duplicated this particle emitter from the original particle emitter, so we can kind of use that to our advantage. So let me go ahead and select the second emitter, the planet emitter, and I'm going to right click here where it says rate particles per second, and here where it says emitter 1 rate output, I'm just going to click that, and that is going to show our keyframes that we already have from before. And what I'll do is here where it says 50,000, just going to change that to 800. And that way I don't have to really set any more keyframes. I'm just changing the value of that one keyframe that we already set from the previous emitter. So let me go ahead and hit enter there, and we'll back this up to the beginning. We've already randomized how they're going to throw out. So let's see what it looks like. So yeah, that's going to be a lot more like the kind of thing we need. Let me go ahead and make this play a little longer. That way we'll let it play, and then, so that's going to be a good start for us. So let's go ahead and go in now and start getting these satellites to start to swirl around these planets. So I'm going to select our particles, and I'm going to use a Newton field on these. A Newton field is a field that will sort of make the particles go in and out a little bit and swirl around. So let me go ahead and come up here where it says fields. I've got my particles selected. I'm going to go to the Newton field, and you might want to go ahead just in case and come over here and reset the settings. And now I've got that field connected to those particles. So if I play this, you can start to see they're sort of all just crunched down here in the middle. So what we can do now is instead of having them all just chunked down here, we can select the planets. I'm going to go ahead and shift select that Newton field that we just made. And so instead of having the source of the field right here in the center at the origin, we're going to make all of these particles be the source of our Newton field. So the way that you do that is after you have your planets, your selected, and your Newton field, you're going to go up here to fields, and where it says use selected as source field, go ahead and click that. And we should start to see it's starting to spread out a little more. It's not quite really what we want yet, but we're going to just keep working on it a little bit more. So what we'll do is we'll have our Newton field selected. It's going to be under our planets now in the outliner. Come over here to the channel box, and we're going to find where it says apply per vertex. So we just need to find where that is. It's going to be an off and on setting. So there it is right here, apply per vertex off. We're going to change that to on. And then we're also going to keyframe the magnitude of this Newton field as well. So we're going to go here where it says magnitude. And at frame 0, we're going to actually, I'm going to back this up just a little more. So we've got a frame 0. Whoops. We're going to go to frame 0. Actually, you know what? That's actually not what we're going to do. We're going to do that a little different way. So let me go ahead and change that back to 1. I'm going to go to frame 100. And then for the magnitude right here, we're not going to have any magnitude at all. We're going to have it just set to 0. So there's not going to be any influence of that field at all until frame 100. And then I'm just going to jump over one more frame to frame 101. And I'm going to set that magnitude to 1. And key it there as well. So, and then I'm going to go into the attribute editor. And we're going to find under distance here where it says use max distance. I'm going to check that on. And then I'm also going to change the max distance to a +3. So that way, you know, we have the distance of how far away the field is going to affect from each particle. So we're going to use a max distance, so it's not going to be any farther than that. That way different particles will go to different planets. And then we're going to make sure that the mass distance is big enough so that it'll be surrounding the whole planet particle. So that's what that's going to do for us. Now let's go ahead and play this and see what it looks like. And you can start to see now that these particles are going to start to swirl around. As they come out, they're going to start to cluster around the big planets and swirl around them. And that's what we're kind of looking for in this simulation right here. So we're going to do a couple more things that, you know, give it some color and whatever and make it look a little more interesting. So let's go ahead and start with that. The first thing I think that I'll do is I'm going to change the color of this background. I'm going to hit 5 so we can see our solid planets. There we go. Seems to not be working as well as I'd hoped. So what I'll do is come up here and just come up to smooth shade all so we can see our planets there. And then what we're going to do to give color to our planets, it's a little tricky. Let's make this so we can see it a little bit easier just when we start to do our simulation. I'm going to come down to my camera attribute editor. Go down where it says environment. And I'm going to make this a dark blue, kind of like space. Just so we can start to see our small particles a little bit better. And, you know what, the other thing I might do, just to even make it easier, is come up to my preferences. It's going to go actually to the color settings right here. So instead of preferences, I'll go to color settings. And I'm going to find my 3D views and my background. I'm just going to make that our dark blue. And that way we can see a little bit better our particles. I'm going ahead and turn the grid off as well. And now you can see even better what's happening with our particles. And then we'll put some color on the planets using what's called expressions. Those can be a little bit tricky, but we'll go ahead and start talking about them. I'm going to select my planet shapes. And we're going to use some expressions to create some color on this. So I'm going to come down here. And we're going to talk about this section where it says per particle array. And also a few of these buttons down here. So these are some attributes that are set up already on our particles for you to create some expressions for. Now expressions are a little bit tricky. They're a little bit, you know, like more like programming than art. So they're kind of, you know, not so artist friendly, but they're really, really, really useful for creating all kinds of stuff, especially with particles and in particles when we talk about that. So I want you to not be afraid of expressions, even though they're kind of scary maybe to you, unless you're really good at programming, and then run with it and have fun, because you can do so much with them. But you can create all kinds of effects using expressions. Because what an expression really does is it says, take this attribute and apply it to this object in a certain way, and then it eliminates the need for so much keyframing that you would have to do, because you can just do a little programming right there on it, and then it will do whatever you want for the whole scene on its own. And that's what we're going to do here with the color on these particles. So we're going to have my particle selected and go in here to our attribute editor, and we're going to come down here where it says add dynamic attributes, and we're going to add some color attributes, because right now we just have gray planets and that's boring. So I'm going to click that, and then we're going to choose Add Per Particle Attribute. Now, if you look over here, you see sort of all these attributes, and then you'll have something like lifespan, and you'll have 2 capital P's, so lifespan PP. That means that that's going to apply to each individual particle rather than the whole set of particles. So that's what we're going to have here. We're going to have a Per Particle Attribute. I'm going to check that on. I'm going to say Add Attribute. And now if you look here, we have RGB PP, which we didn't have before. So what that means is red, green, blue per particle. So that's our new attribute that we just created. Then what we can do is right click on this and go to where it says create expression. And then we have our planet shapes, and we have our RGB PP over here in our attributes. That's what we're going to connect together with our expression. And then we're going to type this down here. Now, the thing about expressions is they're case sensitive. They respond to all of the spacing and all of the punctuation. So you have to type it exactly like this or it's not going to work. So that's the thing that's tricky about expressions, because it's like programming and there's no room for error ever. But this is what we're going to type. Planet, capital S, and the rest of the word shape. So planet shape, you're checking right here. Then we're going to put a period, RGB, and then 2 capital P's. Then we're going to say equals RAND. I'm going to put a space. I'm going to put in left parentheses. Then we're going to have 2 greater than signs. We're going to have a 1, comma 1, comma 1. And then 2 less thans. And close up the parentheses, and then you're always going to end your expressions with the semicolon. So that's our expression. Let me just talk about this for a second before I create it. You're going to take your planet shape node and connect it to the RGB PP, and what you're going to tell it to do is randomize all of those channels all the way between 0 and 1. So all the different colors of red, green, and blue are going to occur through all of these planets. So we've got it typed. I'm going to hit create, and we've got an error, so that means we've got to go back and see what we've missed. And this is going to happen sometimes with this stuff. And you know what's happened is this says planet with an S. I only have without an S here, so I'm going to put my S in, try it again. And that has fixed it. So that's how picky the expressions are. You have to type it exactly. But now what you can see is, if I deselect these particles and play them again, now we have all different colors for our planets. And instead of going in and making tons of shaders and figuring out which particle to assign it and blah, 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 all we did was type a little thing, and then Maya knows to pick all kinds of random colors for the particles. So now the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a couple little things with the size, because we're actually going to do the same thing for the size of our planets, because we have all the same size of planets right now, and that's not very realistic either. So I'm going to select my particles again. We're going to come down here, and we're going to add a general per particle attribute, a general dynamic attribute. So I'll click general. And then I'm going to come over here to the particle tab, and there's all these choices that you can pick from. Tons and tons of things that you can use. I am going to come down where it says radius. So yeah, we've got different types of radiuses. Radius here, which would just make all of them bigger or smaller or whatever. Radius PP, which is going to control the per particle radius. That's the one that we're going to use. I'm going to say OK. And then now I've got this radius PP attribute over here. I'm going to right click and go create expression. And then we're going to add this to that. So just hit enter. You want to make sure that you leave this in here. Otherwise you'll lose your color. And we're just going to add another expression to our particles. So planet's shape again. Dot. Radius PP, so RADIUS, capital P, capital P. Then we're going to have equals rand. And then we're going to put a little space in, put in our parentheses, and it's going to be between 0.5, and then I'm going to write a comma, and 3. And then we're going to close off our parentheses and hit the semicolon. And then I'm going to edit this expression, which means that I'm going to take what we already had and add the new part. And now you can see it's changed. If we play this again, you can see we have all different sizes of planets. And then if we zoom out, it'll look even more interesting. Let's zoom out a little. Oops. There we go. So you have all different sizes of planets. Let's zoom back in a bit. That was a little far. With all the little satellites swirling around them. So another thing that you might want to do, since we changed the sizes of the particles, some of these planets might be trapped inside because of how we set the Newton field. So go ahead and select your Newton field again. And here where we have max distance at 3, let's change that to a bigger number, up to 6. That way the particles won't get trapped inside the bigger planets. And then you can start to see all kinds of cool stuff happening there. So, and then you can sort of view it from different angles. And that's just a little particle simulation that we've done. So what you want to do now is go ahead and just play blast 500 frames of this. And that's what you're going to turn in for this tutorial. So go ahead and do that, and then you can go on to the next thing.